Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Jimmy's Jambox. We're here. We're back at it again, and we're going to get on into it. But before we do, as always, please make sure to like, subscribe, push all the buttons, do all the things. You know, I don't know where they are, but you do, and I trust you. With that being said, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
Organic herbs and botanicals, skincare and edibles, wellness for body and mind. The Brothers Apothecary. Fine teas and remedies. Ronald Records. From indie gems to classic hits, discover the heart of local music. With live shows all the time, up close and personal, and regular releases on their in-house label. Ronald Records. Supporting the community, one track at a time.
All right, thank you all so much for watching. Again, shout out The Brothers Apothecary, Ronald Records, and Portland Water. Thanks for keeping us hydrated. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get on into it. Here is today's guest.
How you doing? Damian Erskine.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about, who you are, where you're from, what you do, give us that like Tinder profile of your involvement with music.
Ooh, let's see. Well, I'm a bass player in Portland, Oregon. I've been here since 2004.
Okay.
So,
and where were you at before this?
Near local. I've moved around a lot. I was, before this, brief stint in Boston, but I was in the Bay Area for about 5 years.
Okay, where at in the Bay?
Marin County, Fairfax.
Gotcha. I'm from Sunnyvale, which is just right outside of Mountain View.
Yeah, I got a lot of friends down that way.
Yeah,
and but I bounced around. This is my 12th state or something like that.
Oh, dang. Okay, where were you like born initially?
Born in Vegas, but primarily grew up in Jersey.
Okay.
South Jersey, outside Atlanta.
Yeah, so you've just been
just
across the country. Yeah.
I moved coast to coast a few times. And I've always just gotten a little itchy every 4 or 5 years.
Fair.
Until I got here.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, this is officially the longest I've lived anywhere.
Okay. Well, hopefully you stay as long as you want to.
Yeah.
And what got you started into music initially?
Initially, I had a lot of musicians in the family.
Okay.
My grandfather forced me to start playing bass when I was 6. My uncle's a well-known jazz drummer, Peter Erskine. So I grew up watching him play. He gave me a drum set at about 10, and then I fell in love with the drums, and I was really a drummer for a long time. Kind of a self-taught metal drummer.
Gotcha. Those are the best ones to self-teach yourself.
Oh yeah, it was like Slayer cover bands. I was just like all in. Then I started going to Berkeley. Felt wholly out of place. And I thought, well, I've always played bass. Maybe it makes more sense. I can't think of anything I want to do more than music, so maybe I'll just switch it up a little bit. And I just fell in love with the bass. Had a lot of catching up to do, but I just kind of kept chugging away.
Yeah. Well, also, I think it's cool that you have a foundation in drumming because there's such a big connection between the two.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And like having like I am also a bass player, and I took a stint of time where I was doing like recording for a bunch of people, and so I wanted to learn the instruments better, so I bought them all.
Yeah.
And one of the things I bought was a drum set, and by the time I got comfortable on the drums, my bass playing just grew a bunch.
Yeah, I feel like especially bass players, but every musician should play a little bit of drums.
Oh yeah, very much so.
But especially as a bass player, it just changes your relationship with rhythm, but also playing with drummers. Drummers tend to like playing with me because we get this kind of telepathic thing. I know where they're going. We understand where each other's coming from.
Yeah. And there's so many cool patterns that once you learn them on drums, they translate over to the bass so well.
Yeah. My whole playing ability kind of took off when I separated my harmonic shed from the rhythmic shed and started practicing bass like a drummer. I just started focusing on subdivisions and odd meters and all the ways you could just play with rhythm, and then it just really expanded my vocabulary.
Yeah, because then you get to like figure out which notes to put and like the strikes versus just like what note connects to the next note to the next note.
Yeah, exactly. It just gives you a broader palette. To draw from.
I love that. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that more definitely in the middle of this, but before we get into it, I have a couple foundation questions I like to check in with everybody on.
All right.
And this first one is one we ask early, it's one we ask often, and it's definitely a crowd favorite. What was the first album you ever bought with your own money?
Ooh, Metallica Ride the Lightning.
Okay. Hell yeah. What led you to that?
I have no idea. You know, I remember the first bass lines I learned were like Duran Duran, Hungry Like the Wolf, and Billie Jean. But that was just radio stuff that popped in my head, and I was like, oh, that's the thing to know. But I went through this, I discovered metal, and I just kind of was all in. And first concert was Metallica, first album was Metallica.
Oh, dang.
And then I just kind of went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And actually, coincidentally, the next question I was going to ask is, what's the first show you ever went to that was like specifically one you wanted to go to? Was that it?
Metallica, yeah, it was Monsters of Rock. And
I
went for Metallica.
Yeah.
Like it was Monsters of Rock, yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
And that was terrifying.
You know, the first show I ever went to was Ozfest 2005 because Iron Maiden was headlining with like In Flames and Black Label Society.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, okay, like I have to go to this. And my mom was like, I'll take you. I was like, perfect. Wow. We get there and I'm like, Mom, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was going to be like this.
Yeah, at least that was a stadium, so I could like kind of carve out a little peaceful corner of the world for myself.
Yeah.
One of the first club shows I went on my own to was it was Sacred Reich opening for Pantera at a little club in New York.
Oh.
And it scared the crap out of me. I just spent the whole time, I was barely old enough to get in. I spent the whole time by the exit to make sure I could get out if I could. It seemed like everybody was 3 feet taller than me and twice as big.
Yeah, and they were all bumping into each other.
Yeah, and it was just like, it was terrifying.
Man, I couldn't imagine Pantera in a club.
It was great.
Ooh.
I was really into Pantera at the time too, so it was very cool, but also it was like...
Yeah, no, I could only imagine. All right, and then before we officially get into you in the here and now, do you have? I mean, and you kind of touched on it, and it sounds like you've obviously been into music pretty heavy since the get. But do you have a defining moment that was like the moment you decided you wanted to take music more seriously?
No, you know, it was always. I had this kind of dichotomy going when I was a kid because I could never think of anything I wanted to do more than music. So music was always my focus. And when I thought of making a living, I could never think of anything else that I would want to do. But I was also very insecure and I also couldn't imagine myself or visualize myself as a professional musician. And I quit a few times in my life because mostly insecurity. But I would always just come back around and be like, well, throwing drywall sucks. So like, maybe I can get some gigs, you know, get back into the music thing. And eventually there was a defining moment, when I moved here, actually. I mean, I was very much playing, you know, maybe at the time, 100, 150 shows a year. You know, I was gigging a lot. Yeah. But there was a moment here where I was working at a coffee shop, Pappuccino's on Southeast Woodstock. And I decided, you know what? I'm tired. I'm not shedding. I'm not making any money. If I'm going to be broke, I might as well work on my thing instead of working on somebody else's thing. So I quit my job, and my wife at the time was very supportive. And I just said, all right, if I'm not working, you know, I'm going to put that time and invest it in myself. Yeah. And I kind of had to double down because there was a point in my life where I thought, should I get a real job or like, what am I doing? I don't want to be broke the rest of my life. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? I want to be a musician, whether or not that means I'm broke for the rest of my life. So I quit the job. And if I wasn't, you know, practicing, I was going to a jam session or I was, you know, trying to hustle some gigs or, you know, I just put all of that time I would spend working in a coffee shop and put it towards my career and my ability to play music well.
Gotcha.
And just kind of doubled down on it. And that's when things really started to kind of happen little bit by little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds like a pretty solid defining moment.
Yeah. Thank
you for sharing that. But now let's go ahead and let's get on into you in the present day.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about a bunch of the stuff that you do, but first I want to hear about kind of you more as the musical artist, the person who plays music, makes music, writes music.
Right.
So I know you work with a lot of people. I imagine you make some music for yourself as well. When it comes to like getting a track started, are you making music yourself? Do you like come up with your own things on your own time? Or are you always working with other people?
Always working with other people. My whole goal in life was to be a freelance musician.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to be that guy that could jump into any band and sound like that was my thing, whether it was a country group or a jazz trio or a whatever. I do have 4 albums, and 3 of which are mostly original, 2 of which are entirely original, one's a little bit half and half. But writing was never something I was real driven to do. It was something I consciously chose to do because I thought, oh, that's something, that's a gap I have. I should work on that. And I figured what better way to force yourself to write than to book a recording session.
Well, fair enough.
So I just did it and forced myself to write a bunch of tunes. And came up with enough for 2 albums. But I quickly learned I didn't really like being a band leader. Mm-hmm. I like just knowing what I'm going to make, where I got to be, and how long I'm going to be there, and show up and do the best I can. And it was never a bug that I caught. It was something I would do kind of as an exercise, and I was never a huge fan of the tunes I wrote. Like, I thought some of them were pretty cool, but there's a weird disparity between the music I write, the music I listen to, and the music I wish I could write. But, I just thought, well, it's cool. And the bands are great. I know a lot of great musicians, so it's very cool, but it's not like, I never felt like it was my voice. It was just what happened when I sat down to write a tune.
That's fair.
And I came up with a cool version of that thing, but I never felt like, oh, that's who I am as an artist.
No, I gotcha. And I mean, I guess since you said there's kind of a separation between like what you listen to and what you write, is what you listen to more similar to like the people that you play with?
No. I mean, these days I'm bridging the gap a little bit, but actually 9 times out of 10, I'm listening to talk radio or podcasts in the car.
Fair.
But when I listen to music, I mean, it's all over the map. I've been in a thing where I've been listening to a lot of Erykah Badu and Common and Roots and stuff like that. But usually 9 times out of 10, I'm listening to some obscure, like Northern European artists. But the stuff I write tends to be more odd meter Afro-Cuban stuff. And the stuff I play pre-pandemic was a lot of jazz, maybe 90% jazz, 10% other things. Post-pandemic, it's like 95% R&B and soul.
Interesting.
Funk and gospel stuff, which is kind of my happy place as a bass player.
That's a good spot to be for a bass player.
I just love it.
Yeah.
Like jazz was the thing I worked on because it seemed like the expressway to, like the express lane to proficiency.
Yeah.
And then I eventually developed an appreciation and then a love for it. But as a player, I just like playing bass. I never wanted to take a million solos or, this, that, and the other. And like, I've kind of found funk to be my happy place.
Yeah. Well, definitely in funk and things that are adjacent to it, you kind of get to like a quarter solo during all of it. You know what I mean? They let you walk around enough, but not so much that they're like, all right, take it away forever.
Yeah. There's a lot of freedom to explore, especially with the drummers I know. Like, we just get into these great spaces. But it's, maybe once or twice a night where they're like, okay, and now you're like, do a thing. And half the time that's with me and the drummer. We get to do a thing together, which makes it more interactive and more fun.
Yeah, no, that's rad.
I enjoy playing over changes and kind of exploring the thing, but I just, I spent a lot of time thinking I was supposed to be that kind of player and comparing myself to like technicians and amazing, these guys that can just solo circles around me. And then at a certain point I kind of realized like, I don't actually care. Like, I have a deep appreciation for it. Yeah. But it's not really what I want to do.
Yeah. You're just
kind of released myself from the expectations I thought other people had of me. And just got into what brought me joy, and that wound up being just like playing pocket all night.
Hell yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah.
And I was checking out your schedule, and you said before you were like doing 150 gigs a year. how many are you doing now? Because yours is pretty stacked.
Yeah, I mean, a couple hundred, like 250, something like that.
Okay.
Pre-pandemic, I was on the road a lot more. I usually averaged about 130 days a year on the road, which isn't crazy by a lot of people's standards. But nowadays, I only have one touring band left, and it's more like 50 or 60. But in town, I'm working 3 to 5 nights a week.
Gotcha. Okay. So
different groups.
So you that is like your main thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And actually, I saw, since you're talking about cool drummers, I saw you're playing a show soon with Machado Majiga.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out Machado. He was a friend of the show, and he's been on before.
Yeah, Machado's always fun.
Yeah. And before we move into more of it, I do have a quick question, because, as from one person who is always working on their stuff all the time to another, how do you find time and space outside of music for yourself? Or do you not?
I do. I try. Yeah, no, it's funny. This week I was saying, man, I basically have a week off. I only have 2 gigs. But then I look at my schedule and it's like, it's either a rehearsal or teaching, or I have 3 gigs coming up where I need a lot of shed time. I spent all day today making charts. Yeah. And stuff like that. So I'm always doing something. But yeah, my wife, current wife, is a singer, and she's on the road more than I am. And so when we both are home, we tend to really maximize our time together.
Okay.
Because we just love hanging. So we're like, okay, we're focusing on that. Like, I'll even push things off till like, oh, she's leaving on Tuesday. I'll do this thing on Wednesday. Because she's my bud. But yeah, you just, my calendar is my best friend. Mm-hmm. Even like
to Google Calendar.
Yeah. Even practicing for a gig or whatever it is, I have to put it in the calendar. If it's not in the calendar, it doesn't exist. So I also have started scheduling myself downtime.
Oh, okay.
And just like leaving myself an evening free or the first half of a day free, so I can just take a walk or sleep late or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds like a pretty solid way to manage it.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of curious, how did you and your wife meet initially?
Through music. There's a band I play in called Outer Orbit, which it kind of started pre-pandemic, just a bunch of buds. But during the pandemic, everybody was off the road.
Yeah.
Guitar player was always on tour with Ghost Note, drummer tours with Alan Stone. And, everybody was like off doing something. But then the pandemic, we're all home. So we started meeting usually at Wilshire Park in Northeast Portland, bring a generator and just play for some tips and whatever, just to play.
Yeah.
And then it kind of really solidified. And we didn't have a singer. We would just call different people for different gigs. And then we had one thing at the Goodfoot one night pre-pandemic, and they brought Sarah in, and all of us were kind of like, oh yeah, that's the one. And so we quickly became very good friends. And then, it just went from there. That's awesome. When I was single again, all of a sudden it was like, came closer friends.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I having talked to a few people on the show now, there's a really interesting dynamic to the relationships that are where both people are heavy into music.
Yeah.
It usually seems to be a really positive experience.
Yeah. And there's, I've lucked out. I've generally had partners that kind of understood the creative process in one way or another. But, she definitely understands touring and road life and rehearsing and navigate what it takes to be prepared for a gig, not just at the gig, but before the gig.
Yeah.
And we get to, when she's in town, we get to play a lot together as much as we can anyway.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you're not taking away from music just to spend time with each other even, so.
Not often. Whenever we get the chance, we're stoked to actually play together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she tours with a band called The Motet out of Denver.
Oh.
And last year she was touring with them and Portugal the Man, so she was gone a lot last year.
Awesome. I love The Motet.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah, hell yeah. That's rad.
They just played St. Louis last night, and they're working their way down south.
Oh, that's awesome. And actually, that kind of segues well into the next question. So, you played all over the place. You've been to multiple countries. You've been in, I imagine you probably played in every state by now.
Yeah, I've played, except for Alaska.
Ah, never. Anybody in Alaska?
No.
I know I've got a few people watching up there. Let's make it happen. What was the first big moment that took you out of the country?
I'm not sure what the first out of the country thing was. Might have been with Gino Vanelli. I still tour with Gino. I just got back from Vegas with him yesterday. At the time, I joined him in 2010, and we were doing Asia once a year, usually South America once or twice a year, and Europe once or twice a year.
Oh, man.
But I also started playing with my uncle for the first time around that same time. And I know our first gig was in Buenos Aires, so that I'm not sure which came first.
Fair.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, that's still, I guess I'm curious to know what like, because out of all the places you've been outside of the country, what was one of your favorite places to play music?
Japan. I always loved Japan. I just love the people and the culture, and they are such music fans. Actually, it's interesting. The very first time I played in Japan, I spent the first half of the set thinking, man, I don't know if they're digging it. They're just sitting there staring at us. And then after every tune, it was just like erupting applause. Like they're captivated and they're listening and they're so appreciative. It's very cool. But yeah, also at damn near anywhere in Europe, they just have a different relationship, especially with the jazz thing. I've always had a blast. I don't know. I just like playing everywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine most places.
Yeah.
But anytime I get somebody who's out of the country, it's always cool to kind of hear like the different experiences for there.
Yeah.
And I also, this is a weird side note, but I listen to a lot of like comedy podcasts.
Okay.
And they tend to say that certain places have like a better response to comedy. So I'm slowly piecing together the overlap there.
Yeah.
But getting back into it, outside of just, playing music and jamming bands and being a part of that, you also teach music.
Yeah.
How did you come into that realm?
Initially, just because people would ask me at gigs. And then I started doing it and I realized, oh, this is kicking my ass a little bit. It's hard. And so I thought if it hurts, it must be good for you. So I kind of went ahead with it. And then eventually I came to realize how fulfilling it was in a lot of different ways, especially some of the relationships I started to have with students. And once I used to teach pre-pandemic for jazz education abroad. And we would go to different countries that were underserved in music and hold jazz camps. So every year we went to Shanghai, Bangkok, Beirut, Cyprus, and and that was a trip, like teaching kids in different countries that hadn't really been exposed to jazz or only had a YouTube familiarity with jazz.
Yeah.
And that was hugely rewarding. I started teaching at PSU in 2010 too. That was a busy year.
Yeah, seriously.
And again, it's the relationships with the kids, and it's just something I get a lot out of. It still kicks my butt. Like emotionally, 2 hours of teaching will beat me up more than 4 hours of playing.
Oh, I could imagine.
Because it's just a lot of mental intensity.
Yeah, a lot of eye contact, a lot of explanation of your thoughts.
And trying to, I've never thought myself the greatest teacher, but I've had a lot of students that have gotten a lot out of it.
Yeah, very much so. Well,
so I just keep doing it.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, that you must enjoy it enough because you started an entire website.
Oh, yeah.
To it, baseeducation.com.
Yeah.
Down below if you all want to check it out. I went through it. I gave it a good old look, and I got to tell you, it's incredible. It's such a cool site. Like I said, playing bass growing up, I mean, it was just Googling explanations of who was doing what. It was reading tabs. Like there's that one video with like Larry Graham that I like buried into the ground from watching so much of. But it was cool scrolling through your page and like just seeing like how much you have to offer. And I mean, just from what I saw, it was not, it was like lessons that were pre-prepared. It was workout material. It was like live stuff, which I thought was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, I've really made it a point with that to try. I've always, and this it carries into my teaching too. I always wanted to be the teacher I wished I had at different points in my life. And a lot of that is just availability, just having somebody that you can ask.
Yeah.
I got this really dumb question, but I just really don't know, those kinds of questions to, and have a dialogue. So, on the site, I do live webinars once a month where people just hit me with questions or ask me to explain something or play through something. I really wanted to make myself available.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've definitely done so, and this isn't a paid for plug, but $10 a month or $100 a year is a great deal. Like, that is like, aesthetically, that is like the best numbers I think you could get for what you offer.
Oh, nice. Thanks. Yeah. I wanted it to be accessible.
Yeah.
The whole thing, I have a couple of books I wrote years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I had the idea of doing a site like that well over a decade ago, but it was just too intimidating. I didn't have the know-how, video editing. I didn't even know how I would do it.
Yeah.
So it was just a back burner thing. And then the world closed. So first thing I did was record a 2-hour DVD,
mm-hmm.
basically, a streaming thing, for one of my books, which is it's all about my right hand technique.
Yeah.
And, it helps to be able to see it. And then I was like, I got nothing else going on. Why don't I just try and do this thing? And I wound up slowly figuring it out. And, I'd spend 5-6 hours trying to make videos during the day and spend another 3 or 4 like watching YouTube tutorials and on how to edit video. But yeah, I wound up coming up with 150 or so videos, lessons, and organized the site in a way that kind of makes sense. And now I've integrated a community. So actually that's where most of my time is spent in there now, is just talking to people in the community and dialoguing. And
well, it's cool that you make yourself so accessible through it. And just like get to kind of live in that space. And now you get to teach so many people. And I feel like as time progresses, you probably get like conversations and new things to add to it that are like stuff you would have never even thought of as like lesson stuff.
Yeah, especially early on. I always encourage people to, hit me up. If there's something you're not finding on there, let me know. And if I can, I'll do something. At this point, I haven't added videos in a while, because I feel like everything I know is up there. So now it's more about just like talking to people about it and helping them understand when they have questions, or showing them during the webinars. But yeah, there's probably at least a couple dozen of those videos came from questions directly asked by community members.
Well, that's awesome.
It's cool. Yeah.
And actually, because you brought it up earlier, I do want to ask you a little bit about some of the writing you've done, because like you said, you've written 2 books, Right Hand Drive and the Improviser's Path?
Yeah.
And then you've also done writing for Bass Player Magazine, Bass Musician Magazine, and you're still currently writing on No Trouble. Is that correct?
Not currently. I stopped doing that a few years ago, but yeah, I wrote for them for a long time. Like a weekly Ask Damian column. People would send in questions.
And when did you decide to like move into writing?
Well, initially, my first book, the Right Hand Drive book, was born out of, in 2009, I think, I did a Gospel Chops Shed Sessions video. And I started getting a lot of questions, emails, asking about some of the right hand technique. And I was on the road, and I was like, I had just answered my, 90th the same question the 90th time. And I was like, man, I should just come up with a little pamphlet. So at first it started as like a 10-page pamphlet explaining the things that were most often asked. And then I was like, well, I should just make it better. And so that turned into a 100-something page book. And then the end of that book was kind of harmony as I came to understand it until then. Then I started to understand it a lot more. And instead of adding on to the other book, I thought, let me just write a whole new thing about improvisation and fluency on the instrument and all that kind of stuff as I understand it. Because I'm a jazz school dropout. I dropped out of Berkeley and then kind of taught myself. So I came to know what I know through a very systematic sequence of steps. And then that turned into a 250-page book about that.
Yeah. Well, it's cool too, because like both books feel like they're focused on, literally one is called the right hand drive. Yeah. The other one feels like it's almost more left hand focused, like what to do once you get this hand going.
Kind of, yeah. And the brain, like how to about it or not think about it.
Yeah, very much so. And then how did you get into like writing for magazines? Like did that just kind of come through like
they approached me. Yeah, I somehow, to my bewilderment, started getting classified as a guy in the know about if I felt like I didn't know anything yet. And yeah, No Trouble. And big shout out to them, because I think a lot of people came to become aware of me through the No Trouble thing. But I started writing for them pretty early, and that became their most popular part of the site. And I wrote for them for a long time, weekly column for a number of years.
Yeah.
And and then through that stuff, and then in the industry, you just get to know people. I had some friends who worked at Bass Player Magazine. Shout out to Brian Beller, who was the one who used the name Right Hand Drive in an article he wrote about me.
Oh, nice.
After we sat down at a NAMM show and played together, and he wrote a thing about it. But yeah, so I wound up knowing some of the editors of Bass Player Magazine. They reviewed the books, and then they started asking me to contribute columns once in a while. And, you just kind of get, word spread, word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, that's rad. Yeah. And now this question is probably more for me than anybody else, but what bass are you currently playing?
Sorry. I have a guy in Ohio, Pete Schold, Schold Designs, SKJOLD. Looks like, I always thought it was going to be skilled or something. He showed up to a gig I had in Texas a long time ago, like maybe 2008 or 9 or something like that. With car, he used to be in Texas, now he's in Ohio. Car full of basses, and he's like, check these out. And we just developed a friendship. And we always say we kind of came up together. He's built every bass that I've played for the past 10 years or more. So I'm currently, I have 2 years ago or so now, I got my first 5-string. Got a 5-string headless, because he asked if I wanted a headless, and I was like, just make sure it sounds good, and I'm cool. Yeah, and I just love that thing.
Do you mind if I ask why you stayed away from 5-string up until so recently?
Well, I played 4 forever. In college, I jumped straight to 6.
Oh.
6-string for like a solid decade or more exclusively. And then at one point, I kind of was like, especially when I started doing more funk, stuff like that. And I was like, 6 just is like, it's not necessary. It's great for reading, or if you're playing salsa or playing a lot of solos on a jazz gig. But so I got back into the 4, but then I missed my B string.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about I've always appreciated the low B higher up the neck than I think a lot of people ever gave it credit for.
Yeah. Well, there's that sweet spot in the middle of the neck where all the notes are just a little rounder, a little fatter. I tend to play up there more than anywhere else.
Yeah, very much so. And now, do you have like a signature bass then? Or are you just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking?
I do. Early on, we came up with a signature model, and that was what I played for a long time. But then he's always experimenting with things, and I'm always needing different things depending on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I actually don't have one of my signature basses right now.
Okay.
I brought the bass to him, because we're going to experiment with some MIDI pickups and do some things with it. And we both just have been so busy. Like, the bass is still sitting in the shop, I think. And I've just been playing this other bass on everything, every style, everything. I just freaking love it. So
yeah,
I'm not even worried about it at this point.
That was pretty rad still.
He's amazing. His thing, he's a player too. He gigs, and he was in Vegas and gigged for a long time now. He's in Ohio, and he's still playing. And he understands the bass as a luthier, but from a player's perspective. So when I talk to him, and I'm not a technical guy, I can't say like, I want a roasted maple necking on this and a Nash body so you can get this guy, and overwind the back pickup. But I just tell him in my dumb bass player talk what I want it to sound like. And he, we usually spend an hour on the phone. He's like, all right, yeah, I get it. I got you. I got some ideas. And then he'll send me a thing. And I think all but once, the very first bass he sent me, I was like, it's not quite what I was talking about. And then he said, send it back. And he sent me, and every bass since then has been like exactly what I was hoping for. Man, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to have a bass that was like designed specifically for you to play. That's got to be... It's pretty wild. Yeah. And he knows exactly, first thing he did was play my bass that I was, when he came to the gig in Texas. And so he's like, okay, this is how you like it set up? You like the spacing? So he gets, all my basses come like kind of ready to go. Like he knows exactly what I'm looking for, how I want it to feel, what I want it to sound like.
That's awesome.
He's kind of a magician.
Oh man, that sounds rad.
Yeah, it is.
Before you met up with him though, what were you playing?
Before him, I was playing a Zahn. I loved that bass. It felt incredible. And before the Zahn, I was playing a Modulus. And I thought, I was really into O'Teal Burbridge. And I liked how roadworthy they were because the graphite necks, you can drive over them with the Sprinter and it'll be all right. You'll pop a few strings. But the graphite thing, especially when I started playing a 6, the C string just sounded so thin and plinky. Yeah. It drove me nuts. And in a strange way, it was a blessing in disguise because that's how I came up with my right hand technique was because I use my thumb a lot. Because the sound was too thin, so I started palm muting everything. And I got frustrated with how handicapped I was, so I started really investing in the 3-finger technique so I could palm mute but still not be handicapped technically. Then that just kind of became its own thing. But yeah, so Zahn, Modulus. I also had a Status graphite. I was like really doing the graphite thing for a while.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience with them on like a regular scale. Are they just, is the big appeal that they're lighter, or is it just that they're just bulletproof?
It's just that they're bulletproof. And especially when you're touring, the nice thing is that the necks won't move. They never will.
Yeah, because they don't.
Put it up once. And I mean, you can just throw some Loctite in the bridge and like it'll never move. And that's exactly how it's going to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I imagine it's not like susceptible to like heavy altitude changes in temperature too.
No, not at all.
Man.
You can literally leave it through the trailer and, drive from Miami to the mountains of Colorado and it'll be just like you left it. It'll probably still be in tune.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good to know if I ever decide to start touring.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into the next bit, which is all hypothetical questions, this next question is probably the densest one in the interview.
All right. Well,
but, we've talked about your experiences with music, your actions, your reactions, but when it's just you and music, one-on-one, what does music give back to you?
It's... Ooh, I don't know. It's, music for me is such a team sport. My weakness coming up was that there was nothing more boring to me than sitting in a room by myself playing bass, practicing. And I found ways around that by gamifying my practice and thinking of interesting ways to approach things. But the thing music really does for me is just, I don't know, I'm kind of a social introvert and a little socially awkward, although I've learned through music and through gigging and touring and constantly being surrounded by a million people, I've learned to kind of how to mask it well or how to operate regardless of what's going on internally. Music is the one time I feel entirely comfortable in a group of people interacting with the people. I'm always the guy at the party who's just kind of sitting quietly in the corner, just like watching everybody. And I look like I might be bored or indifferent or, aloof or something, but I'm really just like feeling kind of awkward, but also having fun just watching everybody's interactions and doing the thing. Music is the one time I feel like I can speak with my full voice and really be a part of the group.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
But now let's go ahead. We're going to move on to some hypothetical questions.
All right.
And for these, sky's the limits. The questions are all made up, so the answers are allowed to be as well.
All right.
But this first one's pretty straightforward. And seeing as you've interacted with a lot of people already, I'm very excited for this answer. But if you could work with any one person, anybody, the only requirement is they have to be alive.
Ooh.
Who would you want to work with? And I mean, I always ask, how would you want to work with them?
Yeah. Oh man. Well, lateral move. Whenever anybody asks me if you could be in any band, what would it be? I usually say Lettuce.
Oh,
Adam Deitch is he's like one of my bucket list drummers. I have a lot of bucket list drummers, but he's like, he's up there. And I just love that band and the way they sit in that pocket. Like every time I listen to any Lettuce, I'm thinking, I wish I wish I could. I wish I was on stage right there with that, playing that groove with Adam.
Yeah.
So he's one of the living people. I've been pretty blessed to play with most people I've wanted to play with.
You know, before we get into it, can you list a few of the cool people you've gotten to interact with?
Well, my uncle, which, you know, he was always Uncle Pete. I never thought I'd play music with him at all. We did a Jaco Pastorius tribute week in Japan with me and Richard Bona.
Whoa.
And the very first song, 8:30 was a live Weather Report album, was my favorite album. I still think it's one of the best live albums of all time. And it starts off, I think it's Black Market, starts off with this drum fill straight into a groove. And that was the first tune we played. And I had chills all up and down my spine. Every hair on my body just stood up. So I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This is what it felt like. So Uncle Pete for sure. But got to play with Dave Weckl a little bit with the Buddy Rich Big Band. He loves that band. So whenever we'd play Catalina's, he would come and sit in. I got to tour quite a bit with Les McCann. And what have I done? I play with a lot of cool people. I'm kind of blanking. The fusion side of things, got to play with Jeff Lorber, which was a lot of fun. It's, you know, it's not necessarily the music I'd listen to if I'm in the car.
Yeah.
But man, that stuff is fun to play. Very cool.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I won't make you dig too deep into the barrel for that, but those are definitely some solid names right there.
Yeah.
Now, for this next one, I'm almost more curious on this answer than the first one. Although Lettuce, by the way, I have to say one more time, great answer. That's a solid choice for sure. But subsequently, who's a local artist that you're aware of that you haven't gotten to connect with yet, but you would like to?
Huh. I can't think of any.
I had a feeling you probably worked with a fair amount of people by this point in the area.
Yeah, that I'm aware of. I'm always meeting fantastic, you know, the young players coming up that like is blowing my mind these days. But also, I'll also hear of, you know, somebody like, I know Brian Blade lived in town for a while, and I was like, why did I never connect? He's one of my bucket list drummers too. But yeah, of the people that I know are in the Portland, Vancouver area, I think I have hit or have been hitting with most of the ones all the ones I can think of.
Fair enough. Like I said, I had a feeling that was going to be the case, but that's still the question that goes there every time. So I'm going to leave it.
I'm sure on the drive home, I'll be like, oh, God.
If you remember, text me and I'll put it right.
All right.
For this next one, like I said before, sky's the limits, and it's pretty literal in this sense.
All right.
But if you could perform anywhere in the world, and I mean, you kind of already have, but if you could and it doesn't have to be a venue. It could be like, you don't have to worry about crowd access or building stability or power. Like, it would just work. Where would you want to perform?
Red Rocks.
Okay.
There's just something about that. And speaking, I was mentioning my wife, Sarah Clark, who's with the Motet, but also was doing Portugal the Man. She got to play Red Rocks last year with Portugal the Man.
Whoa.
A lot of cool venues. I went to her 40th birthday. She was at the Hollywood Bowl with them. So I flew down for that. But I flew out to Red Rocks too, because that's always been one of my bucket list venues. And it was a blast just being there and getting to watch her do it.
Man, it's somewhere I haven't gotten to go yet for music, but some of the coolest things I've seen in like the last like 3 years, as far as just like performances that have come from there, I've all been there.
It's pure magic. I mean, it's just being like, you know, side stage. When she's doing her thing and just looking out, it's pure magic.
Yeah.
It's got such a vibe. And then the green room, like inside the thing, it's just, thing's got a vibe.
Yeah. I couldn't even begin to imagine. And coincidentally, that is a bucket list for this show. I would love to actually do an interview that leads to a performance.
Oh, there you go.
Because I wanted to do Madison Square Garden, but Kill Tony beat me to that. So now I'm gunning for Red Rocks. If I can make it happen before them, I'll be doing good.
MSG got to be somewhere on the list.
Oh yeah,
I would love to play there, and Hollywood Bowl, and you know,
it was at the top until they did it, and I was like, all right, I got to find a place that somebody hasn't done yet.
And I have a lot of friends that have played Red Rocks. So I'm always living vicariously through the buds.
Yeah. And then to wrap up the hypothetical questions, if you could get one more album from anybody, they could be alive, they could be dead, they could have not put out an album in 100 years, they could have put out an album yesterday.
Oh.
Who would you want an album from?
Man. You're asking some interesting questions. I don't know. All the people that are popping into my head that have passed, I feel like they kind of said what they had to say. You know, there's always the, you know, Jimi Hendrix was so young when he died. What would he have done? I suppose there's also something to be said for going out in your prime, because you just leave bigger than life, larger than life. Yeah. And everybody else, they're still cranking them out. I honestly can't think of an answer.
That's all right. Hey, if you think of that one on the drive home.
Yeah, I'll text you that too.
But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. Cool. What can we look forward to between, let's say, like now and April? I mean, I know everybody, you'll plug your schedule in a moment, I'm sure, but any cool things coming up that we should keep an eye out for? Now
through April, I actually just did my last road gig this past weekend, so I'm not going out again until March.
Okay.
That'll be with Gino Vanelli. I think we're just doing some Texas dates or something in March. I'm just going to be local. I play every Sunday at Alberta Street Pub, every Sunday that I can. And that's with Soulful Sundays. That's 90s R&B and hip hop, and that's a blast.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really good band. That's my regular thing. Other than that, yeah, it's just a lot of everybody, a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, I got you.
Around town.
Well, then for this next one, go and look straight at your camera. Tell everybody how they can find you.
All right. So you can find me. Easiest way to link to anywhere and everywhere is DamianErskine.com. And Damian is spelled with 2 A's, DamianErskine. Or basseducation.com if you're into learning about the bass thing. And other than that, Instagram's pretty much my only social media these days. And
Oh yeah. And then any other plugs, any other shout outs, anybody else you'd like to put on while you're on here?
Well, you know what? I had such a wonderful year with Gino Vanelli. I've been, like I said, I've been in the band 14 years. But he's still going strong. We just recorded a live DVD in Serbia and just played at the Westgate International Resort in Vegas, which was like Elvis's old.
Yeah.
Great room. So it's been a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to hitting back with him in March. So thank you, Gino, for a fun year. Fun 14 years. Many more to come. And my girl, Sarah, she's the best human I know. And my bud Tyrone Hendricks, who's Soulful Sundays, and he tours with Alan Stone, but he's just a bud, and he's been really good to me and supportive of me. So I might as well say his name.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. All right. With that being said, I've got one last question to go. But before we do, I'm going to steal the camera for just a second.
Yeah, do you think?
As always, y'all, please make sure to like, subscribe, push all the buttons, do all the things. I don't know where they are, but you do, and I trust you. And one more shout out to the Brothers Apothecary, Ronald Records, and Portland Water. Thanks for keeping us hydrated. And with that being said, the final question. And this is entirely up to your interpretation.
All right.
But in all of music, what is an album you feel is more on the obscure side? It's a deep cut. It's one not a lot of people would know, but it's one you think everybody should know.
All right. Well, two albums come to mind. One I mentioned, 8:30 Weather Report, live album, Jocko and my uncle on drums. That's just, I'm surprised that, those that know, but I'm always surprised, especially with the younger generation, how many haven't heard that album.
Yeah.
They've all heard Heavy Weather and stuff like that. Another one is an album my buddy Pete Knutson turned me on to, an artist named Lewis Taylor. A British soul artist. He has an album called I think it's just called Lewis Taylor. I was going to say Bittersweet, but I think that's just a song on the album. And it's like, it's surprising. It's a little bit of a slow burn. Like some of the tunes you're like, oh, okay. But then you let it go for a while and maybe you hear it a second time and you're like, oh, wait, it's just getting kind of deep. Like there's some really beautiful, truly beautiful moments on these albums. And that's one that I know a lot of people have had fun turning other people onto that album. And it hit me pretty hard the first time he played me a couple of choice cuts off of that record. We were actually all at a house on the beach, Outer Orbit, that band I talked about. having just a little writing weekend. We're like, let's just get out and come up with some tunes. And one of those late nights, like he just threw it on and we were all just kind of like, all right.
Oh yeah.
So that was, I'll go with Lewis Taylor. And you know what, one other artist, if you're into the jazz thing, a lot of Americans aren't familiar with him. Lars Danielson. It's just it sounds like the perfect marriage of European classical tradition married with jazz. He's a wonderful bassist and cellist, and just comes up with some really interesting music. A lot of it has Tigran Hamasyan on piano, and just like stellar cast of players. But yeah, Lars Danielson.
Oh yeah. Well, those are all 3 super solid tracks. So thank you very much. But with that being said, we're going to go and wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. And this has been another exciting episode of Jimmy's Jambox. I'm Jimmy.
I'm Damian.
And we're signing off. Later, y'all.
That's a wrap.
This is not a podcast. This is a show.
Keep jamming.